It is Wednesday, December 6th, 2017. The time is 7:03. This is the Plan Commission of the City of Evanston. I'm Jim Ford. We have a quorum, so I will call the meeting to order. You have the agenda in front of you. Are there changes to be made to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda will stand. You have the minutes of the joint meeting with the Zoning Board of Appeals on August 30th. Are there additions or corrections to be made to the minutes? Hearing none, is there, oh, sorry.
I have a question. So are we only approving it in its entirety, or just the Plan Commission portion, or how do we respond to this?
The Zoning Board of Appeals has already approved the minutes, so it was, yeah, you'd be approving in addition to their approval.
All right, with that question answered, is there a motion to approve? Lewis, seconded.
Second.
Belisle. All in favor? Any opposed? Hearing none, the minutes of August 30th are approved. The one item of substantive business, public business, I guess, before us. Case number 15 PLND 0102. A recommendation for a text amendment to the zoning ordinance to amend the requirements for the C1A zoning district. This came to us, I believe, as an aldermanic reference, so the staff will be the petitioner. It also, as you know, comes to us with a recommendation from the zoning committee. There are members of the public here who want to testify on this? Yes? Okay. Our purpose then, this is a public hearing, our purpose is to gather facts and information regarding the proposal and to prepare a recommendation to City Council. That recommendation could be for adoption of the text amendment with conditions, or no action to be taken. And the Council is the final determining body. We're a recommending body in this case. The procedure we will follow is this. I think staff will summarize the proposal, the zoning committee's deliberations, their recommendation, and the standards for approval. Commissioner Lewis or any other members of the zoning committee may wish to add to that introductory material. We'll then allow for commissioners to question staff. After that, members of the public may question staff. Those questions should be relevant to the standards that the proposal is required to meet, and we will take only questions at that time. Upon the completion of questions, then members of the public may present testimony. You'll be under oath. Again, testimony must be relevant to the project and the standards. I would encourage you not to repeat what someone else has said. Typically, we limit public testimony to 2 minutes, but I think we've got a small enough group tonight that we can be a little bit flexible about that. Commissioners and staff may address questions to the members of the public who testify. Staff will then be allowed to make whatever brief closing comments they want to make, and we will close the hearing record and proceed to deliberation. We may, if we wish, continue this hearing to a future date in order to secure additional information. That will be a date and time certain, which will be announced before the continuance. If a continuance is, if we decide on a continuance, there will be no further notice. In addition, any person or group with an ownership or leasehold interest within 500 feet of the zoning district in question may be granted one continuance for the purpose of presenting evidence to rebut, essentially rebut testimony in the recommendation given by staff. That request must be in writing. It may be made at any time after staff completes its presentation and before we close the record. If a continuance were granted, whoever requested it would be the first testifier at the continued meeting. If there was other testimony to be taken tonight, we would take it just in order to get as much done as we can tonight. If you testify tonight and there is a continuance, you will not be allowed to testify at the continued meeting. Those are the procedures. If you intend to speak, or if you expect you may be asked to speak, I'll ask you to raise your right hand since this will be under oath. You promise to tell the truth in this proceeding? Thank you. All right. Who's going to present?
Good evening, Chair Ford, members of the Plan Commission. I'm Megan Jones, Neighborhood and Land Use Planner. As was stated before, Plan Commission received an aldermanic referral to review the C1A zoning district and make considerations regarding either retiring it or making adjustments within the zoning district. So quick background on the C1A zoning district. It was established in 1993 with the overhaul of the zoning code. There were regulations that were revised in 2000, which correlated with the Chicago Avenue Corridor Recommendations Report. Now that report, which encapsulated a broader area of Chicago Avenue, included some recommendations that were specific to the C1A zoning district. And those included a reduction of the allowable height from 107 feet to a height within 55 or 67 feet. This was adopted within the zoning ordinance with the maximum height being 67 feet. Elimination of the parking floor exemption rule, which was adopted within the zoning ordinance. This particular aspect, there was an allowance kind of similar to the downtown districts where if there were levels that were dedicated to parking, those were not counted in the zoning height. So that particular regulation was struck from the ordinance. Also recommended revising the parking space requirements to provide for guest parking and require a 1.25 to 1.5 spaces per unit. This was partially adopted. It doesn't address the guest parking requirement, but generally the parking requirements are in line with that 1.25 to 1.5 recommendation, and that's for all zoning districts. And finally, review the lot coverage and FAR regulations to be compatible with the overall goal of reducing height and bulk of new development. This was partially adopted, mostly with the increase of the minimum lot size at that time from 300 square feet per dwelling unit to what it is currently at 350 square feet per dwelling unit. Now, the general intention of the C1A zoning district is to provide locations for the development of mixed-use buildings consisting of retail-oriented and office uses on the ground floor, and office uses and or residential dwellings located above, as well as multifamily residential. A higher FAR and building height will be permitted in the C1A district in order to encourage this type of development. Now, some additional background pretty much regarding how we got to this point. In April, the City Council referred the topic of the C1A zoning district to the Plan Commission with the intention to possibly look into retiring the zoning district in place of new regulations. In August, this went before the Plan Commission very briefly, which referred the item to the Zoning Committee. The Zoning Committee has had 2 meetings, the first in October, where discussions began regarding the district and concerns that were brought up regarding the density, the heights, unit sizes, and walkability within the district. Ultimately, the committee wished for some additional information about the existing conditions within the C1A zoning districts, and also requested that possible recommendations for text amendments for the district be brought back. At the November meeting, staff returned to the committee with their requested information and recommendations for possible amendments to the C1A zoning mixed use zoning district. These included a further reduction of the height, an increase in the lot size per dwelling unit from 350 square feet to 400 square feet per dwelling unit, a possible increase in the minimum sidewalk width, and possible inclusion of an incentive where if we reduce the base height, there may be a way to increase the amount of height provided if additional setback was provided from the curb. This is the general area that is considered or being considered tonight. It's roughly from Lee Street down to South Boulevard. This is the main area where we have a C1A zoning. And also the Plan Commission may remember, we recently rezoned a property for 831 Emerson that is now also zoned C1A, which is not shown on this particular map. So what is being proposed this evening, based on discussions with the zoning committee and research that was done by staff, we are proposing to have text amendments that would address the density and the pedestrian area within the zoning district. So this would specifically include amendments to section 61034 related to lot size. That would increase for residential uses the minimum residential lot size from 350 square feet to 400 square feet per dwelling unit. We'd be adding a new section that addresses the pedestrian area. And for that, within the district, that pedestrian area from the curb to the building facade would have to be a minimum of 12 feet. And due to those changes, we would have to go back to where we have the setback requirements listed, specifically in section 61038 for yard requirements. We'd list the required setbacks and add the exception where required by the new section that's been added.
Megan, could you slip back to that slide for just a second? Thank you.
And this chart is a comparison of the zoning districts that are adjacent to the C1A zoning district. There's a fairly broad range with regards to FAR, maximum number of units, as well as height. So as you can see, the zoning areas that are adjacent to the C1A are pretty different. Some have similar heights or FAR, but may differ in other aspects. Now, should the commission decide to move forward, we would need to have the following standards for the text amendment met. The first being whether the proposed amendment is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive general plan as adopted and amended from time to time by the City Council. Whether the proposed amendment is compatible with the overall character of existing development in the immediate vicinity of the subject property. Whether the proposed amendment will have an adverse effect on the value of adjacent properties, as well as the adequacy of public facilities and services. With that, I will open for questions.
Let me ask Commissioner Lewis, do you want to add anything from the zoning committee's perspective?
Lighting the wrong light. So maybe I can just add a little bit of the color of the discussion that went on during the deliberations. The first thought was we were asked whether this district was still pertinent and whether it should remain. And it was, I think, almost unanimously thought in the committee that it was a very viable district and very appropriate for the location that it's in. That it fosters the and continues the commercial nature of Chicago Avenue, where it's mostly located, and also promotes dense housing, which is appropriate because of the abundance of rapid transit train, both types of train in the area. So it's a very appropriate zoning district to promote the use of those and also provide a lively commercial area. And then the other concerns, which were the density, height, the nature of the unit sizes that have been coming on, and the what's called walkability. But what I think we talked about more was the quality of the street level environment. There was quite a lot of deliberation on that, and I'm not sure how much people were convinced whether height was an issue. It's not the tallest area. In fact, it's next to an R6 zone, which allows, as a base zoning, considerable more height than what's there, and the density seemed appropriate. Unit sizes, there's just been, I think some of us felt more passionately about the small nature of the unit sizes that have been recently passed, looking to promote larger apartments and things. So that was discussed and thought to be a problem. And then the street level or nature actually had quite a lot of discussion on what was the issue there. There had been mentions of canyon effect, which I think most of us didn't think was really appropriate because the whole district is facing the train tracks and is also quite open for the entire length of it. So it could be a cliff effect, but that's not a canyon effect. So it was some of the ground level. So we thought it was a little bit of the continuity of the ground level experience that was maybe not as nice in certain areas, where it constricts in certain areas to a very narrow sidewalk was not as nice. So we deliberated quite a bit on how to make that a more viable and livable. And as far as incentives went, trading height for voluntary setback by developers, we thought, well, that's going to leave it to the discretion of the developer how much the setback happens. So I think the focusing on having a minimum width of the sidewalk was thought a better and more applicable way to get a more uniform, wider ground level environment. Because if you leave it to incentives, you could have 20-foot plazas and minimum, whatever it is, 8 feet, I think, is the minimum walkway that's there. So that's kind of where the discussion went. I think in the end, the vehicles that were chosen to modify the increased amount of lot area per unit size and the height restriction, I'm not sure. There was no evidence to say that how this would be effective, and I think at least I dissented on the vote because I wasn't convinced that these were going to fix the problem if there really is a problem. And so that's my comments of the discussion.
Staff, want to?
Sure. Thank you, Vice Chair Lewis and Megan, for the presentations. I just did want to add one other piece of information for the Plan Commission. While this text amendment that's proposed would affect all the properties that are currently zoned C1A that were shown on the map in the presentation, with the addition of 831 Emerson Street. More broadly, it could also apply or would apply to any properties that could be rezoned to C1A in the future. And also letting the Commission know that Alderman Rainey is making an automatic request for the Plan Commission at some time in the future to look at the properties on some properties on Howard Street west of Ridge for a potential rezoning to C1A. Obviously, that request and those properties are not on the agenda tonight. A map amendment request in the future, if that moves forward, would be properly noticed to properties in the radius and in the newspaper, et cetera. But did just want to make the Commission aware of that fact.
Thank you. Question down here?
Yeah, I had a question for staff. After the committee meeting, was this text or this proposal, was it run by city law staff?
It was. There wasn't any additional editing or revising of the language.
My only concern with the requirement of a 12-foot sidewalk that would presumably, what we're saying here is that we would have it.
Commissioner, let's stay at the question stage
Sure.
at this point.
No problem.
I won't forget. Other questions? Commissioner Small?
Yeah, I have two questions. One, and I think Commissioner Lewis touched on this in his remarks, but if staff can tell us what the goal of the text amendment would be, what are we trying to achieve, or what problem is being addressed, and then also how this would affect 831 Emerson, if at all.
Well, generally speaking, with the text amendment, this particular text amendment would try to begin to address the issue of density, concern that there may be too many units within a particular site, as well as addressing the issue of making sure that we have a walkable stretch within our various districts. So there are different portions of Chicago Avenue that get fairly narrow, so that was a major concern that was brought up as well. So we're attempting to address those two items first here.
Sure. If I could add, I think that the committee kind of looked at the general and, as was mentioned, kind of looked at the intent of the district and everything it's doing and how it works, and then kind of narrowed down to some of those issues. So the two that are resulting in the proposed amendment have to do with the number of units that could be built there, and without changing the floor area ratio that's allowed, by reducing the number of units that would be allowed, that may be a lever to encourage larger unit sizes. So that would be one potential item that could be addressed. And then obviously the minimum 12-foot width setback there would increase the width of the sidewalk, and it was more consistent with some of the newer developments where the committee felt, such as Amley, that there was a more pedestrian-friendly environment, similar to 831 Emerson. That property and that project is already entitled and is resumed. The plan development ordinance has been approved, so this would not affect that. They do have their rights there.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Are there any issues with traffic, services, just trying to understand?
As they exist now, I'd have to say the issues would probably be anecdotal. I don't have any hard, concrete data regarding like accidents or the daily traffic counts on that street.
I'm looking at the map. Am I correct that the four corners of Chicago and Maine are another zoning district? I can't read it. Or are they C1A? Right there.
Yeah, it does get a little confusing because there's an overlay district here. But it is C1A
It is.
in those
Okay.
corners.
All right. Do you know offhand, the building on the northeast corner of that intersection, which I think is the oldest of the three new buildings, how wide is that sidewalk?
I believe down there along Chicago, it's about 8 feet, or maybe like 8.5 feet.
Okay, I know you noticed, you note that across the street at Crossroads, it's 8.5. I wondered if it was that narrow.
I think it gets slightly narrower right in front of Crossroads.
Yeah.
But
Yes, it does
generally,
pinch.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, if it's the northwest corner you're speaking
northwest
of,
corner.
that one, there's sort of an arcade to the base of that building there, so it does get a little bit wider, and then the building cantilevers towards the street a little bit.
Okay. Question? I assume the ziggurat requirement is only in the downtown. Is that correct? Doesn't apply in this case?
Right, that
Okay.
particular one.
That was one of the things discussed, whether I believe that was one of the vehicles for maintaining or relieving the canyon effect that was discussed, but not thought
Yeah.
applicable.
If there are no further questions from the commissioners, and if there are, we can take them, the members of the public want to address questions to staff at this point. I see no heads shaking and no nodding and a couple shaking, in which case we will proceed to public. Aha, okay.
Just a clarification.
Come to the mic, would you?
Yeah, sure. Just a small group here. Okay, so it says reducing the maximum planned development site development allowance for dwelling units from 40 to 30%. Can you just clarify what that means?
So there, sure. Thank you, sir. So there is a base level requirement or allowance for development standards, and then
Right.
through the plan development process, there's ability to request an allowance. So that was one of the items that staff was looking at changing that to reduce the amount that could be granted as an allowance. That is not being proposed at this point.
Okay.
So no changes proposed there.
Okay.
In other words, the extra you can request is now lower. Am I correct?
That was an option that was
Okay.
presented to the zoning committee. The zoning committee ultimately did not
Pursue that.
recommend
Okay. I see
changing.
that.
making
I was
that.
just reading the notes or whatever. I wanted to make sure. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Then we will proceed to public testimony. I have two people registered. We'll begin with Matt Rogers.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Matt Rogers. I live at 133 Clyde Avenue. There's some new faces up here, so I'll use my old job description as well. I was chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals for 3 years and on the board for 10 years. Coming a little late to this, but I do have some concerns with changing the C1A district. I think it would actually be much more beneficial to look at what's trying to be accomplished in Chicago Avenue and look at can that be accomplished by zoning that entire area C1 and leaving the C1A as a tool that can be used through a map amendment for people to be able to gain a little extra without necessarily having to go through the plan development process. Because not every project in the C1A has to become a planned development. But it does give a little extra leeway in terms of height, in terms of some of the other variations that are granted by right. The C1A district that's being discussed on Chicago Avenue seems to me to be a little bit of trying to put the horses back into the barn. There have been some major changes along that street in recent years, and those have been approved by council and by the aldermen of that ward, and I think we've kind of already let some of the goods go. And so in order to be trying to impose new rules, I think would actually alter the face and look of that district potentially by having setbacks that are further than currently are there in certain areas, and creating very much a stepping back and forth as you head up and down Chicago Avenue. And finally, I just was consulted a little bit about my feelings on the Howard Street project. And that's one in particular where a C1A definitely does make sense to try to go for a map amendment instead of trying to come through as a planned development probably. I don't know all the details of it yet, but it does make sense that that would be something that would be easier on a developer to do, to work within the restrictions that are placed in an existing zoning area, instead of having to necessarily have to come through with a bunch of different changes each and every time. It would be a little easier to give developers a little further leeway on some of their projects in other parts of town without necessarily having to go through the whole plan development process.
So are you suggesting that if that whole corridor was rezoned to C1, the effect would be to require fewer excursions from the zoning ordinance given what's being built there?
I think that what you're doing is you're looking at projects that are going above and beyond even the C1A district requirements as they stand, and trying to create areas where that's not necessarily something that would be built, or if it does come in, it would be a planned development that would be asking for additional above and beyond. I'm glad to see that the C1A is not going away, because I do think it is a valuable tool. I just think that it's a more valuable tool in its current iteration than by tweaking it and making it something that cannot be used in other parts of the city. I think this has really been focused in on Chicago Avenue, and it should be looked on a grander citywide scheme.
Okay. Other questions for Mr. Rogers? Is it fun to be on that side of the podium?
You know, it's interesting to be on this side of the podium. You will have an opportunity coming up very soon.
I will,
and this is your last meeting?
This is my last meeting, and I'm trying to decide how soon I'm going to come in and hassle them.
Well, it's fun if you can go to boards other than your own. So I come to you instead of going to ZBA, so I would encourage you to take cases to ZBA.
Oh. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Mike Lowe. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Question?
No, I can wait. It was not for Mr. Rogers. It was for staff.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Lowe.
Hello, my name is Michael Lowe, and I own a building with a business partner, 928 Chicago. It's the one with the lamp store right by Doc Gables. And I want to make 2 points about this. I just learned about this recently. But one point is going down the Chicago Avenue from Lee south, there's quite a number of larger buildings, but there's really only about 12 smaller buildings. So I do agree with the other gentleman's point. Like in some cases, the buildings are pretty small that are left, and to have a sidewalk go back and forth might not look good. So it's that's a factor. But I think that when I look at the building at Main and Chicago, the new one, which I actually like a lot, I think they did a really good job. And I was really happy that whoever zoning committee decided to make some rules about how the building looks from the outside and that and this and that. But as far as what's proposed now, it would limit our ability to do things in the future. I don't see that this is going to solve the density problem of Evanston. And I think that we should look at it as a whole community and not just penalize the last 12 buildings that are small after the mega developments already came in, because that's what I see. If you go down and you can take a look as well.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Lowe? Further testimony from the public? Further questions from the public? Staff, do you want to make any closing comments, and then we'll close the record?
I don't believe there's anything additional, but we're certainly available for questions. Thank you.
Okay. I think if there's no further public comment, then we'll close the record and go on to commission discussion. Commissioner Bellano.
I'd like to ask a question to staff. Hearing all that we've heard so far tonight, and in the first of the zoning committee meetings that I attended, I'm wondering how else, if we don't touch this and we decide to not recommend any of this to City Council, how else can we try to emphasize a lot of consistency of sidewalk width? Umley has a fairly wide sidewalk on Chicago. I forget the address, but the new one has a fairly wide sidewalk. All of these make that stretch fairly comfortable to walk. And how else can we control this if it's not a planned development, and if it's a planned development, without changing anything else?
Sure. Commissioner, as you mentioned, many of the newer developments, or several of the newer developments, do have additional sidewalk width. Those developments were planned developments predominantly. Through that process, there's the ability to essentially negotiate or require additional setback there in that process. However, there certainly could be developments that do not meet the threshold for planned developments, that are less than 24 units, less than the minimum square footage that would trigger a planned development without any requirements or changes to the existing requirements. Those properties could build at property line.
Thank you.
What's the minimum square footage for a planned unit? Planned development? 40? 40,000?
In the commercial districts, there's several triggers or minimum thresholds. One is the area of the zoning lot to be improved with new construction in excess of 30,000 square feet. The actual development itself for construction more than 20,000 square feet. And then essentially the 24 units is the other.
And 24 units. I guess my question would be, given what we have seen happening in this part of Evanston and in other parts of Evanston, what are the odds that development is going to go on along that stretch of Chicago that won't be a planned development? I know it's hard to answer, and I guess it's a leading question. I would guess that my answer would be probably not many, and so that a provision that a change in zoning district that didn't assume planned development, it seemed to me, wouldn't make any sense. Somebody whose light is on? Commissioner Saul, was that your light? Okay, well, and then Commissioner Isaac's light went on first, I think.
So, yeah, I was at the first committee meeting, but not at the second one, and I was in favor of a provision that lowered the height of the C1A district, the extent to which was not really discussed, but then gave a property owner, an applicant, the ability to increase the height by providing a larger sidewalk or setback. As this is written, I'm concerned that this could be construed as a taking and as a condemnation, a form of condemnation of property, that requiring a portion of the property of someone's property to be used for a public purpose. That's what we're really asking. By requiring it, this may not pass muster with the courts, and it may be thrown out at the first attempt of enforcing it. Which is why I asked earlier whether city law staff had been consulted on this proposal. It seems to me that if it were a voluntary quid pro quo, that if you'd like to increase your building height, then it's not necessarily a dedication of land, but you're agreeing to set back your property and leave that setback area free for public use as part of your ability to build higher. That seems to me would be completely acceptable. But by requiring someone to not just set back the property, but then leave that area available for public use, not just for the owners of the property. It's basically like saying anyone can go on your front yard anytime or in your backyard. You have to have a setback, but not just the setback. Public just gets to use it. I don't know that the way this is currently drafted would work.
Commissioner Lewis, you want to respond to that, or
First of all, I'd like to, I think,
or pursue the point?
I think there is precedent for this.
Mike.
It's my understanding that there is precedent for this kind of verbiage.
That is correct. Within the city, there is an overlay district on Central Street, Central Street Overlay District. It does have pedestrian area requirements of a clear zone area, pedestrian street furniture zone area, and that minimum area, and that's measured from curb width. I'd say we have not heard heard the concern from law. I don't know. We've asked them directly about any potential taking issues, but we have not heard that concern with the requirements as proposed.
Has there been development that has been affected by it? The people who have built, actually built?
It's a question we have to take a look at. There has not been a lot of development since it was implemented.
So I would now like to kind of address Commissioner Isaac's concern. The one concern I actually was also favoring more the vehicle that you're proposing, which is the voluntary, trading of setback for height or some kind of incentive. I think the concern with people in the second meeting was the irregularity of the street front that this would propose, and did not, you have no control over providing a continuous walkable environment that way, because people with an 8-foot sidewalk could choose not to go higher and to use that land, so you could have pieces sticking out. Conversely, you could have people taking an extraordinary amount of space and dedicating it for an extraordinary amount of height. So whatever that is, and so you would get this arbitrary line. Now that said, I always thought that 12 feet from the curb line was also a fairly arbitrary measure, because if they decide to widen the street, then you've got people who are automatically then in violation and the street gets narrower, or you extend it and then you possibly, it's kind of, it's a moving datum that you are measuring from. So this was the, I think though, was the thing that allowed to have a continuous guaranteed street front. So.
Yeah, I'm not usually a fan of slippery slope arguments, but it seems to me that this one makes some kind of sense, that if you allow for that trade-off, unless you write it in such a way that there is a limit, so you say up to, the pedestrian area cannot be any wider than 12 feet along that area, and it has to be absolute, so that you can't, you so much height for so much additional footage, but nothing beyond 12, and absolutely nothing beyond 12.
Effectively, you have that problem right now, right? There are properties that were built over 100 years ago, and they jut out. And no matter what we decide here, someone can determine maybe not to take the height allowance and build their property up to the line, or they may decide not to redevelop their property at all, whereas other properties do. Anytime you're trying to impose new regulations to a district where it's already been built up, you're going to have the issue we're sort of wrestling with of having an uneven. It's not uneven enforcement, but just uneven reality of what you're looking at and what you're.
Of physical unevenness.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's necessarily a reason not to do something. We know there's a concern. We know there's an issue. We're trying to find the best way to alleviate it going forward, because at some point in the future, these buildings that were built 5-10 years ago or in the last year, they may go away as well. And we're looking to even it out over a long period of time.
Commissioner Dubin.
Maybe I didn't understand some of the legal talk, but my concern is, and I'm not a lawyer, but if the city sidewalk is 8 feet wide and then the 4 feet then becomes sidewalk, but it's on the owner's property, isn't that a liability issue? If somebody trips on the owner's side because of the 12-foot sidewalk requirement? It's one thing if you say, here we're creating a plaza for you and we want some height, but wouldn't it be another thing if the city is saying, give us 12 feet and set your property back 4 feet?
It's still up to the property owner to actually build the building and provide that sidewalk, right? No one's requiring anyone to redevelop their property.
No, but I'm talking about somebody who does want to come in, and if we have a 12-foot sidewalk requirement or a 10-foot, and that means that places where the sidewalk is narrow right now, they'd have to step it back.
I would wager that they would go after the property owner first, the person who slipped the valve.
That might not make a developer too happy knowing that in advance.
But it's an interesting question. Let us assume that there's a building there. Well, I don't even want to think about redeveloping the Crossroads building. But let's take one of the buildings to the north that's got an 8.5 or 9 foot sidewalk, and we now require a 12-foot pedestrian area. Do we assume that the public way is still the existing 9 feet, and the additional 3 feet is on the owner's property?
Yes, but that's sort of my my concern that property owner may turn around and sue the city for requiring that their property be used for a public purpose
and giving no offsetting value.
If it's voluntary, then there's less of, if not no argument, as opposed to if it's mandatory. Now it's required. We have legislated that portion of property away from the property owner.
Let me ask a question then about the other piece of this which is the change in the minimum square footage per residential unit. I gather that you think one of the consequences, if you assume that the unit mix and size, well, unit mix, on average, remains what it has been in that corridor up until now, then the effect is to lower the height of the building. Yes? You're changing the, essentially are you changing the FAR, or are you effectively changing the minimum height?
So the discussion was not to change the FAR, to allow people to build to the maximum amount of square footage and hopefully encourage larger units.
Okay, well, that was going to be my second question. The other implication of this is, if you don't assume that the unit mix remains the same, but that the unit mix moves in the direction of larger buildings, that is how a developer gains height. Instead of building 4 units on a floor, I build 3 units on a floor. I've still got X number of units, so I can go up farther. Am I misunderstanding this?
I think the FAR is what governs the overall square footage that you can build, and that how you divide it up is simply what's being controlled by the amount of minimum lot size. So the unit size would be the thing. So you are correct that if someone decided to build all studios, then FAR probably wouldn't be the thing necessarily governing, or possibly could not be, because they would get to their 400, square foot of lot area before they got to the maximum FAR. But then the incentive would be, if they want to build it out and get more rentable square footage, then they would have to change the mix of the units.
I guess what I was kind of wondering was whether there was some trade-off here between the concern for the private portion of the pedestrian area and the minimum square footage, that if you give a little, you get a little. But that assumes that there's some flexibility in the width of the pedestrian area, and I tend to agree with, I would argue that needs to be fixed. If you say 12 feet, you don't want 14. You certainly don't want only 9. So there may not be much room to negotiate one for the other.
Well, that does assume that a uniform street front is desirable, which I would argue, but that was one of my arguments, was I don't mind having little plazas that people could have dining in, or be able to create little oases along the route, and the uniform frontage is just usually has the nature of a road and doesn't have these places to stop off in and to wait and maybe have a shady tree or a bench or something in. But getting back to your incentive issue it seems like the zoning ordinance is always doing the trade for actual building height for setback or something like that. But I don't, now that you mention it, I don't see why you couldn't allow, increased square, or less square foot per unit as an incentive also for setback. There could be other vehicles or increased FAR or some other measure beside height.
If you're willing to flex the setback.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, I must say, I would tend to be an advocate for a fairly uniform street wall. At the same time, it seems to me that the difference between the 8'6" in front of Crossroads and the 12 feet that might go in a building to the north of it, we're talking that much. And that's about as close to a uniform street wall as you're going to get, I would think.
That extra.
Lights on.
Commissioner Saul's light is on?
I share the concern about the 12-foot pedestrian area and encroaching on private property and how you manage that. It doesn't seem practical to me. If the city is saying its goal is to have 12 feet of pedestrian area, it seems like the burden is on, to some degree, on the city to provide that and not private property owners. But also speaking to the minimum residential lot size, what I heard in the staff presentation is, at least part of the motivation for that is to encourage larger bedroom sizes in terms of unit mix, and I don't see that as the city's role. So and household size, the trend is that household size is getting smaller. So I don't see why we would institute a rule to encourage 2 and 3 bedroom units. I think that's a market issue.
Commissioner Bellile, are you going to come in with the solution?
Probably not, but I want to bring it back to, I think, one of the very first comments that came into the first meeting of the zoning committee was, in all due respect to Alderman Nguyen, is there really a huge issue to fix here? And I am not sure at all. We determined that the C1A was as close to as good as it gets for this area right now. I can't speculate on what could come in the future. We'll see. But I feel like we're splitting hairs right now. That's my comment.
Commissioner Lewis, is that your light?
It is. So I just want to ask a couple of questions to clarify, Mr. Rogers had proposed changing the district to C1, which, from what I could quickly see, is significantly lowering the amount of density and FAR that would be allowable in this area, and more or less make it a low-rise district. The FAR is 1, I believe. The height is this would make it a commercial district. I think if you get an FAR of 1, there's no opportunity to build on top of the build. Maybe you might get 2 stories maximum in that kind of arrangement, right? For that kind of thing. So I'm not sure whether I still think that this area is perfect for higher density housing, and so I wouldn't support downgrading and lowering property values, which I think is one of the concerns in the area. So.
If you recall, I think
Is your mic on?
Oh, sorry. I think we all agreed C1A was a valid, was actually the perfect zoning for the area. But given the amount of properties that could still be developed along that stretch, and it being a transit-oriented area, we would be expecting many more people to be using the sidewalks. So I still think providing sidewalk area for that stretch of Chicago, when it gets fully developed, I think it could be a problem if we don't try to alleviate it in some way. And we may be unsuccessful no matter what we do, if we do nothing or do something here. But I think we see the problem, we see it coming, and I think it's a worthwhile endeavor to try and find a solution, whatever that solution may be.
Commissioner Dubin.
I live downtown. We have very wide sidewalks. It just means people walk 3 and 4 abreast and don't even move out of the way when they see oncoming pedestrians. So it's kind of a human behavior issue.
I would argue that there are more families in that southeast portion of Evanston, and it seems like strollers are becoming like SUVs. They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, and it sort of depends on what the uses are along the sidewalk, doesn't it? I mean, whether it's a plain residential front or whether it's active retail. I would suggest, unless someone's got a better idea, that we take the recommendation as it has come to us and vote it up or down as it stands. Unless someone has got a very clear amendment in mind that they want to suggest to fix it. And if we vote it up, okay, and if we vote it down, then we need to consider where we want to go from here. Does anyone want to suggest a repair to the proposal in the form of an amendment which would meet some of the concerns that have been raised here? Commissioner Lewis.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure procedurally, but I think in the end we do need to vote this either up or down. But is there room after that to re-motion to maybe motion to adopt a portion of it, or to divide the two issues into separate pieces and recommend one or the other?
I think if you want to do it that way, I think we could divide the question. I think procedurally, if someone wants to move the approval of one portion of it, and then the other, it's a little bit unusual procedure, but I think we can do it that way.
I'm looking at the 3 bullet points that are on page 2. If we could split those up instead in some way, that might be the way to achieve what we were just discussing.
Now, I guess my question would be, do you want to I'm looking at page 4.
Chairman Ford?
The amended requirement for the front yard. Oh, no. Yeah, there's a proposed amendment to 6-10-3-8 yard requirements and 6-10-3-11 special regulations for pedestrian area. We could divide the question and vote on those separately. If your feeling is that they're really separable, if part of the solution to this is, lot size, 6-10-3-4, lot size. Oh, yeah, we've got 3 amendments. We've got 3 amendments, don't we?
I would say 8 and 11 are
going together. Those are tied
Yeah.
together
Okay.
because 8 is a consequence of 11.
Yeah, okay. Commissioner Isaac.
I move to amend section 6-10-3-4B by deleting the language 350 and inserting in lieu thereof 400.
Is there a second? Second, Lewis. Okay. On the minimum square footage lot size requirement, is there discussion? This is a recommendation to council, so let's call the roll.
Commissioner Balil,
Aye.
Commissioner Dubin, Commissioner Isaac,
Aye.
Commissioner Lewis,
No.
Commissioner Saul,
No.
and Chair Ford.
No.
So
If I'm
motion
correct, that's
fails.
3 ayes, 3 nays.
Correct.
The motion fails on a tie. So we're back where we started.
Could be a motion on the sidewalk width.
Well, do you want a motion on the sidewalk width? Okay, yeah, let's find out what we got. Okay.
I would like to make a motion to modify the section 610-311 special regulations for pedestrian area to read, within a C1 district, the pedestrian area from curb to the building facade must be a minimum of 12 feet. Subsequent to that, I make a motion to modify section 610-38 regarding side yards to add front yardage language that makes an exception where required by section 6-10-3-11 and section for side yard abutting a street with similar language referring to section 6-10-3-11.
Is there a second?
Second.
Isaac. All right, discussion on that motion.
Yes, I just want to we talk about just a second. By making this, we still we're talking about a minimum of 12 feet. We're not dealing with any kind of trade-off. We're just saying it needs to be 12, not 12.1 or 11.9.
I
Just want to clarify that.
I believe that's the number 12 is definitive. Well, no, wait a minute.
It's a minimum.
A minimum of 12.
But there's no trade-off right now. Somebody wanted to do 14, they can do 14. They're not going to get anything, no candy. Okay, thank you.
I would just point out again that I have concern whether this is whether this would be enforceable. I have not, and I'm not saying definitively one way or the other. I just believe that city law staff should look into the matter before city council
Before it
moves
goes to
forward
council.
one way or the other.
And I'm just going to point out again that there's precedent within the zoning ordinance but we don't know if it's been tested.
Okay, on the question, call the roll.
Commissioner Balil,
Aye.
Commissioner Dubin, Commissioner Isaac,
No.
Vice Chair Lewis,
Aye.
Commissioner Saul,
No.
Chair Ford.
No? It's 2 and 4?
Correct. Motion fails.
Okay. Now, can we go back and look at the question of trade-off? What we said here is a minimum of 12 feet, and setting aside for the moment Commissioner Isaac's concerns, which I think are real, but given that we don't have Corporation Council here, we may have to let that one go and let somebody else worry about it. We say a minimum. Are we willing to give away additional street frontage in return for a change in the minimum lot size per unit? Does it make any sense to do that?
Can you clarify
Well,
your proposal?
if we demand a 12-foot area, a 12-foot pedestrian way, are we willing to go to 15? Oh, I need to back up here and think about this one.
Can I-
Yeah, think for me, Commissioner.
Can I help a little bit?
Yeah.
So the property line should become the datum at this point. I think that's what Commissioner Isaac was saying, not the curb line or the sidewalk width. That has really nothing to do with the owner of the property. That's the right of way, and where the city chooses to put the curb is what determines the width of the sidewalk. So what we would be doing is asking for a distance back from the property line in exchange for some bonus, whether it be unit size or FAR or height. So we would not be controlling the absolute width of the sidewalk. We would be controlling the additional portion, or allowing additional portion, and allowing the opportunity not to have additional portion, of sidewalk.
Why would we do that? What is the objective?
Well, the objective is to be enticing enough in order to make it so people make the sidewalk wider, make the public right-of-way wider. So hopefully no one chooses to just build to their property line. They chose to make more money off of their property by building more square footage to raise more rent, by providing the bonus of additional public space. The idea is a more walkable, more pedestrian-friendly streetscape.
Yeah, keep going.
I'm concerned that this started as a request for us to take a look because there were concerns about this zoning, and it was never really made clear what those concerns were. And all of a sudden, we've devolved into urban planning. And it's not, we kind of,
Well, it is sort of what we're here for.
well, yeah, but it's a nitpicky urban planning like Avenue of the Americas with plazas required. It seems to me that this is, I don't think that the sidewalk width here should be a major piece of this change if we go through with it.
Is this a residual light or?
Yes, it is my residual light, not necessarily in response to what Commissioner Dubin just said. I kind of tend to agree with her, but if we are offering a trade-off, whatever the bonus is given, whether it's height, square footage per unit, whatever, if we're asking that the part that the developer gives us is for public right-of-way, doesn't that kind of take out the effect of, well, I'm giving away property for public purposes? You're giving away property, but you're getting more money out of it because you can go higher, or you're getting bigger units, or whatever it is, and take out the concern of where the person trips. That becomes the sidewalk because you gave a little piece on the flats to go up.
Well, I don't think we're talking about requiring a developer to deed property over to the city. I think, I don't know if this overlay district on Central Street has the, has a good definition for this, but, if we're going to suggest a trade-off, I think we need to have a very good definition of what the property owner is actually providing to the city in order to get whatever bonus they're going to receive. So I think it needs to stop short of a dedication of property to the city, but definition could be something to the effect of the property will not be enclosed. Property will not be enclosed from the property line. Will not be like. Will be available for use, for pedestrian use.
Well, we've called it the pedestrian area. I mean, as the amendments proposed. So I think that's sort of implicit, that what we're asking here is public property, is public use.
Just to chime in there, the zoning ordinance does have a definition for pedestrian area that I believe came into the ordinance along with the overlay district. That definition is the area between the front facade of a building and the curb. The pedestrian area consists of a sidewalk clear zone closest to the building and a parallel parkway/street furniture zone that is between the sidewalk and the curb.
That takes care of what I just said.
Within that overlay, it's much more detailed in the width of each of those components of the pedestrian area. There was a lot more planning that went into that. I don't know that we'd want to get that specific about this particular corridor without all that study.
So does that definition allow for this zone to have plantings and trees, grass area, etc. within the pedestrian zone? Is that inclusive in the?
The way I read the definition here, that the sidewalk clear zone, would be clear area for pedestrian traffic closest to the building, and then that parkway street furniture zone. Typically, those are public amenities, the street benches, parking meters, street trees, items of that nature that are between the sidewalk and the curb.
Sorry, go ahead.
So we'd be forcing people, if the property owner gave 4 feet, say, that zone of 4 feet would always have to be maintained as walkable space. It couldn't be planter or something. It would by that definition, right? We're pushing people to the facade as where the walking
And
is.
the street furniture zone is down near the curb, yes? Does street furniture include trees?
I believe that's something that would be found in that zone, yes.
Yeah, okay. So we're asking, what's being asked here is for additional walkable space.
I think it was just referenced that there was a lot of study that was done with respect to this overlay district and how it was ultimately determined to be legislated. It would seem to me that this area is probably just as important as the area on Central Street. Maybe it's not appropriate for us to do anything without the city doing a little more research into what's really appropriate to alleviate the issues that we see coming down the line should Chicago Avenue become as congested as as it's zoned to become.
In the course of this discussion, at least 2 of you, I think, have asked the question, is there really a problem here?
I would be a third.
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning that way too.
Did you mean with the original wording?
Yeah. Are we trying
The
to
zoning or the proposal?
the proposal? Are we trying to make up a solution here to something that isn't a problem?
I disagree. I think there is a problem. I just don't know that we're armed with the facts to provide a solution here and now. I don't know that a solution is required today, but after looking at it, I can see it being an issue. I don't know that we need to do anything immediately.
Right away?
So, can I?
Yes, please.
So we're making this amendment for as of right developments, basically. And it's my understanding that staff, when they work with a developer for on a PD or something, might very well ask for these kind of street front improvements, such as they have at every single development that I've heard along this front. Is that really so? So we're really only legislating this for the at-right developments, and probably we would have our improved environment at the ground level, so long as staff perceive that as something, as a tool for negotiation with developers. Is that a valid statement?
I think it's correct that these issues, in the absence of a requirement of minimum pedestrian zone area, could be addressed or negotiated through the plan development process. It probably helps where you're starting the negotiation, whether there's a requirement or not. If there's a requirement of 12 feet and the developer wants to ask for an allowance to come closer than that they're seeking something from the city, whereas the other way around, we're requiring something above what's in the code. So it's kind of the starting point for that discussion and negotiation.
I was assuming that they would be seeking something else, such as additional height, and for that you would get that.
Sometimes they seek many things, yes.
Yeah, and that goes back to my question of what percentage of the development that's going to go on in that corridor is going to be of right rather than approach the plan development standards. Well, Commissioner Isaac, I guess I'm not thinking that anybody is of a mind to send this one back to the zoning committee for another shot. Is that correct?
Considering you have a quorum of the zoning committee here, I don't believe so.
Okay.
And if that were to be the case, I would think that getting a direct understanding from Alderman Nguyen, what did she hear from her constituents as the problem, would help.
I would agree, and I am sorry that Alderman Nguyen couldn't be involved in the plan committee discussions and the zoning committee discussions, because I think it might have helped. Then is it your sense that we should take no action at this point and ask staff to report back to council or the Planning and Development Committee that there's some information that we're missing, and that the range of options may be broader than what's been put in front of us?
I second that motion.
I have a question. What additional information would we be seeking?
Commissioner Isaac?
And toward what issue? I mean, all issues, all four issues initially mentioned, or simply this street walkability issue?
It sounds as though the street walkability issue is the most serious one here.
My perception, again, because she didn't get to say what she heard from her constituents, is a reaction to building heights in districts that are not the C1A. But that's my assumption, again, because I don't know.
There have been, is this the fourth meeting on this issue? Third, fourth?
Well, the first one was perfunctory, so this is the third.
And I looked at the minutes, I didn't see any public comment. No one has come out saying there's an issue. I'm not saying there isn't, but there's no public record of support or opposition or any articulation of an issue. That's a question. I shouldn't say. I just didn't see it in my packet.
I think whatever the public, other than what we heard tonight, whatever public concern there has been filtered through Alderman Nguyen, and I'm not sure we have as clear an idea of what those problems are as we might like.
And so I imagine we may be struggling because the issue is unclear or unarticulated. And then I would say personally, in the absence of hearing this, given it's the third public meeting on this, I would recommend that we leave the zoning district unchanged. We leave it, yeah.
That we take no action.
Is that our option? Is that take no
I
action?
would love for
or-
it to be.
We certainly have that option, and we can do that in two ways. We can do it deliberately on a motion to return it to Planning and Development Committee without recommendation, but with the record that we've made tonight. Or if we don't agree on something, it will by default go back to Planning and Development Committee.
I think it sends a strong message to actually vote something negatively than just say we didn't come up with anything.
Is that a motion?
It's not formulated in the form of a motion.
Does somebody want to move to send this back to Planning and Development Committee without recommendation?
I could do that, but I would prefer a recommendation that it remains unchanged.
Oh. A
Yeah,
positive
how would you do that?
recommendation not to change it. Is that a motion?
Yes.
All right, Commissioner Saul moves that we report back to the Planning and Development Committee with a recommendation that the provisions in question not be amended, not be changed. Is there a second?
Second.
Dubin. Is there discussion on that motion? Call the roll.
Commissioner Balil.
Aye.
Commissioner Dubin. Commissioner Isaac.
No.
Commissioner Lewis. Vice Chair Lewis. Commissioner Saul.
Aye.
And Chair Ford.
Aye. 5 ayes, 1 no. The matter will be, the recommendation of no recommendation will be sent back to Planning and Development. Holy cow. I thought the last time was going to be easier than this. Okay. Thank you all. Let's see, where's my agenda? If I remember correctly, the next item on the agenda is the approval of the meeting schedule for 2018. You have that in front of you. The schedule is in every case the second Wednesday, no exceptions?
With the exception of August, the revised schedule presented to you.
No August meeting?
Yes. Correct.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the schedule? Lewis, second.
Second.
Saul, all in favor?
Hold on.
Opposed?
Can we discuss this for a second?
Want to discuss this?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't think we should have a meeting on February 14th. There's a holiday there that some of us just can't avoid. And I know this goes in the public record, but I think we would have quorum difficulties that night, and I would suggest we move it back to February 7th. If that's feasible, or another date that is
Do we-
not February 14th.
I think just by you mentioning it, you've solved any problems you'll have by having to come here.
That's not a problem. It's just that I don't want only 2 of us to be able to make it.
And all of us admire you for having thought of it.
Thank you.
I don't know. How difficult would it be? What do we conflict with if we move it either a week back or a week forward?
I would have to double check the city calendar to see what other meetings might be scheduled either that day or that week. But I also want everyone to keep in mind that we do have the option of having the fourth Wednesday of every month as needed for additional Plan Commission meetings. So that could be a meeting. We do have a lot of things that are kind of coming in the pipeline, so there might be additional meetings anyway. But I would definitely be sending out some kind of email to see what availability would be.
I move to approve the schedule as proposed
My motion-
with,
Yeah,
with
my
a
motion stands,
sorry,
yes.
with a request that city staff look into whether the February 14th, 2018 meeting can be moved to another appropriate date.
Is that a comfortable amendment that staff look into? And y'all make a decision on January 10th what you want to do?
Sounds good
Sounds
to me.
fine.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is carried. All right. Election of officers for 2018. Under the rules, we are required to elect a chairman and vice chairman for next year. Is there a nomination for chair for next year?
I nominate Colby Lewis.
Commissioner Dubin
Second.
nominates Commissioner Lewis. Isaac seconds. Are there any further nominations for chair? Hearing none, is there a motion that the nominations be closed?
Yes, I so move.
Dubin, seconded. Isaac, all in favor of closing the nominations?
Aye.
Then the question is, shall Commissioner Lewis be elected chair for the year 2018? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Commissioner Lewis, I assume you're abstaining?
I am abstaining.
Congratulations, you win anyway.
Yeah. Thank you.
For vice chair, is there a nomination for vice chair for next year?
I nominate Jolene Saul.
Lewis nominates Commissioner Saul. Is there a second?
Second.
Isaac. Are there additional nominations? Is there a motion that the nominations be closed? Dubin, seconded. Belisle.
Yes, second.
All in favor of closing the nominations?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Then the question is, shall Commissioner Saul be elected vice chair for 2018? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Commissioner Saul abstaining?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Good for you both. Then the only thing remaining on the agenda are chair's remarks. I decided to leave myself just a little bit of room, and this could quickly turn into one of those Oscar speeches where the orchestra starts to play over me. But I have a lot of people to thank. Beginning with you all up here and the three of us who are not here. It has been an honor, a pleasure, a privilege, a joy to serve with you all. You know, the only public who know what we're doing are the public who come in here concerned about something. And I don't think the rest of Evanston knows the time and the thoughtfulness and the attention that you all give to issues affecting the city. But we up here know what it's like, and I'm close enough now to being public that I think on behalf of the city, I can thank you all for your service, which is admirable. I need to thank our official public. Jessica Feldman has done her best to keep me honest for the last 3 years, and I have appreciated it probably more than you know from my response. Staff, I'm sorry Mario isn't here. I think Mario became our attorney at the same time I became chair, so he and I have been to the well together for 3 years, and his counsel has been invaluable to me. He's also the guy who challenged me to wear a bow tie. And I have appreciated that. Scott and I haven't had a chance to work together for very long. But I have appreciated your professionalism and your diplomacy when you thought I was going in maybe not quite the right direction. It's been a pleasure to work with you. Megan, I could not have had a better right hand up here for the last couple of years. Megan has always given me good information and wise opinion. She can get a look on her face which seems to say, I think you're crazy, but I know you're the chair, both of which are true, but I will miss you. So, and I have a request and a recommendation to make, and with this I will close. A couple of meetings ago, Commissioner Goddard asked if I was interested in being appointed an associate member of the commission, and I said probably not. It seems to me that if you do not appoint me an associate, that will save you the risk of hurting my feelings when you amend your bylaws to eliminate the position of associate member, which I would recommend you do. Right now, we have only one associate, and that's Scott Peters, who, for good reasons of health, and he's doing well, has been unable to participate in our work. But in the 6 years I've been on the commission, we've only had one associate who really made a substantive contribution, and that was Stu Updike, who had great institutional memory of the downtown plan. But I'm not sure that the associate member position does much for us, so I would recommend that you take it out of the bylaws. With that, thank you all. This has been fun. I'm going to miss this. And I may show up at the podium at some point. Is there anything else to come before the commission?
I think only...
Is there any public comment?
I just appreciate being able to come.
Keep coming. I may join you out there, Jessica. Somebody's got a light on.
I do. Chairman Ford, I want to thank you for your service, obviously before I came on the commission, but also since I've been long as, I believe, the youngest member of the commission. I've learned a lot from you, and things that go way beyond city planning and the city of Evanston. And for that, I want to thank you. And we hope to see you on the other side of the podium, because you understand what we have to go through. So we hope that you'll be everything that you've been on this side. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
No, I have to second that, and I think you've been, not only knowledgeable in the whole matters before us, which you're obviously, I think, you're obviously an expert at, but you're also have shown, been exemplary in being diplomatic and at keeping the process smooth and orderly, even through times where it was, fairly controversial and starting to boil either here or there. And your guidance through that has just been marvelous, and we thank you and your. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn? Oh, come on, people. We have to adjourn. Isaac moves to adjourn. Seconded, Dubin. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. We're adjourned. Thank you all.